are also interested to use these simulation environments to other questions. For example, to the social interaction question. And somebody actually used these frameworks to study the interaction of prey and their hunters in Africa. And so what you see is that this is a group chase and a group hunt of lions going to a group of prey, and they look at protective effects of the size of the herd and the size of the lion pack to figure out, are there situations which are good for the prey and are there situations which are good for the lions. And these simulations actually explain various things observed in nature. Now, I'm not an African hunter, but what this shows is that the application of simulation to questions, social interactions is taking place more and more, and that's what we are doing currently in a project looking at malaria transmission in Africa. In this topic of simulation, you may have read this paper, you may not. If you have not, do it, because it's very stimulating food for the brain. What does it say? So, very probably people in the future will do simulations. Now, I agree with him, because we are already doing simulations. And then he argues that one of the following three arguments is true. Either human species will be extinct soon, before reaching the transhuman stage, or post-human society will not run simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. Now, this means you are probably only a computer simulation, and myself also. If his precondition is true, and his prior assumption is the informational view of man is true. So, this is an important aspect because it's really challenging to our minds, and it's also really challenging to the assumption of the transhumanist thinking. So the question, what is man, what is life, what is a person, and what is truth, is an important one. It's for you important. For me it's also important personally, but it's also important for my patient care. Because in particular in medicine there is a strong link between science, worldview, and medical practice. Now, we have the patient-doctor relationship, the decision-making in the hospital, we have the suffering, the dying, the prenatal diagnosis, the unborn, the mentally retarded, the eugenics, the dying, the euthanasia, the cost problem, the handicap. So we have plenty of real problems in daily life. And most of these questions depend on a unique question, and this question is, what is man? If man is a machine, if man is a machine only, if man is a responsible being, is man's behavior fully predetermined by physical laws like Laplace, Heisenberg, Gödel, or is our behavior fully predetermined by genetics and environment? Are we actually independent thinkers or just machines producing a series of electrical activations? Are we a random occurrence in the history of the universe created by intelligent designs, our own future makers? So the answer to this question will give you a response to what you're doing to yourself and what we are doing to our patients. And that's why it's a very important question, and in many aspects it transcends kind of experimental science and current knowledge. So if you look at medicine in history, then question, what is man, was answered early. Man is the creature of particular value and dignity. So healthcare was an expression of faith and societal responsibility, leading to the ethics of medicine. Man was seen as a mechanically functioning machine which could be mechanically repaired. This was the war surgery who cut off the diseased arm. Man was seen as a person that is amenable to synthetic and natural substances, so pharmaceutics, internal medicine, and now we are living in the age of nanoscience, and the question is what remains? Remains everything true? Do we reduce this to a specific insight? And there is this question from a different standpoint: what is a person? Reductionist versus emergence. So the reductionist approach could be labeled as the H- approach, in contrast to the transhumanist view of the H+ approach. So the essence of man can be reduced to information. The body is in principle disposable. The historical roots of the thinking so old. They can be seen in the Neoplatonists about 1,900 years ago. And being connected to your past is the current statement, maybe stated by Max Moore. It may be a new iteration of this kind of rather reductionist approach to what makes man. There is the emergence view, which rather looks at inseparability of body and mind, because of the claim that a mind functioning on a body may make more to the two than an isolated point of itself. This is also an old idea. If you look at the biblical story of made from the soil of the earth and you made it with the breath of life, somehow points to this view. And I just would like to reiterate what we believe of being a person really makes our life and makes my clinical practice. The natural scientists have always shaped philosophy. Descartes, all matter is divided into small particles driven around in the sky by platform vortices that carry the planets around. So he was a scientist and he had some strong philosophical statements. I think, therefore I am, so the basis of the humanism. Unfortunately, experimental physics do not fully support his science. So unfortunately, it does not claim about his philosophy. Pascal was an engineer, scientist, philosopher. Newton was the fundament of the so-called scientific method, and he was basing his science on the concept of absolute space, absolute time, absolute motion, unified in the natural laws. Unfortunately, these fundaments of his science were shown to be not exact by Poincaré, Lorentz, Einstein a century ago. There is no independence of space and motion, no absolute time, no absolute space. Laplace looked at the universe as a big billiard game, and he said, give me the position and velocities of every particle in the universe, and I can predict every time point in the future. And that's why he had no need of the God hypothesis in his discussion with Napoleon. Unfortunately, Heisenberg showed also 100 years ago that he was wrong. Büchel was an interesting person. At the end of the 19th century, science had the impression that now we have reached the end of scientific knowledge, we know everything. And he said matter is indestructible, eternal, and with absolute certainty, immutability of natural laws, with the most absolute truth and with the greatest scientific certainty, we can say that there is nothing miraculous in the world. The world's mind, spirit, thought, sensibility, volition, life designate no entities beyond the material. Unfortunately, his basis, matter is indestructible, was shown to be wrong 10 years later. 20th century, we have Einstein, who was a physicist and a philosopher. Now, 50 years later, Heisenberg said the great difficulty which even eminent scientists like Einstein had in understanding quantum theory shows that Einstein seems not to be regarded as the one that has the only truth. Heisenberg showed his uncertainty principle and thereby undermining Kant's argument that nature is causal. Gödel, in my view, is one of the most important persons in science in the last century. He proved mathematically that there is no mathematical theory that is complete and free of contradiction. And it's a very important finding because this is the purest of all science, if you want, which proves that it's impossible to fully cover the world that it is by itself. And this has profound implications of our understanding of science. So science is not closed like in the times of Laplace. It's open in a scientific view. Hawking, the famous physicist, had very strong statements about black holes and the predictability of the future, and he reverted his stance after losing a bet with a colleague a few years later. What can we learn from it? We can learn from it that science, medicine, future is a very interesting topic. don't rely on scientists to look in the future. That's what Niels Bohr told us. Prediction is very difficult, in particular if it's about the future. So we're happy to live in an era where we can be open and not need to be bound to fixed conditions. Let me just tell you a short definition of faith. Confidence in what we hope for. Assurance about what we do not see. And this somehow expresses different faiths. This expresses classical faiths like Christianity. This expresses transhumanist faith because the community is very confident in what they are hoping to see in 100 years from now. And we see that this kind of faith has also been translated in words, in kind of a belief statement, to follow their terms, in strong statements of philosophy. So what I want to show is that medicine and science are very interesting fields, and typically they are overlapped by a second layer of things which you believe. I believe that life is a very precious good, and it's worthy to be sustained by all the technologies we can achieve. So I can really say you're doing an important job in thinking about how can you can you have a beneficial impact on individual life. On the other side, I am not convinced that science reduces to a materialistic view of the world. I believe that man is creative, powerful, intelligent, called to freedom and joy, called to make a difference for the world. That's why we are investing also our way into error, selfish and proud, and this is sometimes a problem. Now, from a medical doctor's view, what could you do in cryonics to move them forward to clinical application? I believe it would be helpful for outsiders like me to clarify concepts and to develop testable hypotheses. For example, the concept of structural damage, ice crystals, and functional destruction that you introduce if you do protein cross-linking plastination in a tissue due to preservation should be worked out very clear. And now the whole kind of cryopreservation story looks rather homogeneous, but these are two completely different chapters, and I think it should be stated like that. Then for me the question of short-term hibernation, how can we have a patient survive until we have repaired his disease? For example, the patient has got a heart transplant or whatever, and the long-term storage for repair and the long-term storage for upload are different topics, and I'm hoping to see more clarity in the terms and definitions and efforts there. What about whole body vitrification reanimation in mammals? We have heard that there are 150, 200, a few hundred people now in the cryonics institutes, but knowledge about their stage is very sparse. We have some information about computer tomograms, as I know, but these computer tomograms do not tell us about the chances that these brains ever will recover. Now, if there is significant ice damage to these brains, I'm very pessimistic about the outcome. On the other side, I think it's an important question, and before going with cryonics to 1 million people, we should have a much more profound about the patients you have now. Can we document functional recovery of the brain in mammals that have been frozen, vitrified, reanimated under optimized conditions and protocol? If we cannot recover brains from optimal conditioned small animals, chances are near to zero that this will ever happen in man. How about volunteers who then donate their body to be cryopreserved for a systematic protocol comparison followed by state-of-the-art images and biopsies? There are parts of the brain which are not as important for function as are others, but such findings would really help to understand are you doing the right thing or you are just running in the wrong direction. autopsy. This patient would lose his chances, but would he have had chances? So he might predict chances for other people in this condition. And then experimental any evidence for body-mind dualism and separability. This is highly interesting because out from a worldview, from a faith, you are producing testable hypotheses. And I'm looking forward to see simulations and experiments really telling us more about what man is. And there are data and patients in your hand who help us to educate about this future. And I'm eager to hear about evidence-based cryonics this afternoon. So thank you very much for your patience.
Gosh, that was a tour de force from ICU treatments to lion hunting to ethics to nanomedicine. And Patrick Hunziker has not even mentioned a fraction of his activities. He's, amongst other things, 10 years ago you founded the Foundation for Clinical Nanomedicine that every year organizes a huge conference here in Basel around May, June timeframe that usually has about 3 Nobel Prize winners as attendance. So you told me, would you like to run the risk to take him as a speaker?
Yeah.
I think absolutely, let's give him a hand again. From the audience.
Yes, I was very impressed with the range of your work. And of course, we're particularly interested in how it reflects on cryonics. So I have one question. You mentioned it's important to distinguish in cryonics the structural damage from the functional damage. If you think about what nanomedicine could achieve in the future,
that's not the answer.
What do you think would be more easy to reverse? The ice crystal damage, or the structural damage, or the functional damage?
Now, I believe if you're going into protein denaturation, which is typically done by cross-linkers, with which we have worked 20 years ago in another context, then this will be very tough. I don't believe that we will be able to undo generalized cross-linked proteins in the brain. There are some chemicals like cyclosonic acid which lead to reversible cross-linking, but you need to have this at a very high concentration. So in the end, I believe that the fixation aspect, if you kind of the coarse way is you pour formaldehyde everywhere, everything just freezes down in its state. It's very good for doing microscopy, and it will be impossible to recover anything. On the other side, cellular damage by ice crystals. There I really see problems in repairing by even the most futuristic nanosciences, because most of your cells in your brain will not be functional, and so the task reduces mainly to a kind of reconstruction of the whole heart, and their biology will be much better in building hearts in embryos than so in humans than rebuilding hearts by technologies. And something I have not discussed is the whole question is how much can technology replace biology? And this is something we are also looking at in the simulation aspect. Now, if you're trying to do simulations, the key of simulating is simplifying. For example, the single water molecule, 3 atoms, is very simple physically, but its interaction with the environment is most complex. So even advanced atomic simulations with the use of quantum physics and so, they still end up with a 30% of error in their results. And that means you need a huge amount of computation to model a single water atom. But if you use a single water atom, you always have it already there. So using the original at the very complicated stage sometimes is easier than to use a simulation which makes every Lego builds it up in a very complicated way. Computers will become faster, but not infinitely, because we'll hit the law of miniaturization soon. So computer power will not grow exponentially for all the future. So I have no real answer. Both are challenges. Yes?
Thanks for your presentation. Coming back to your final slides about cryonics moving into the clinical realm, I'm wondering, in a context like Switzerland, do you ever see cryonics moving into the clinical realm, being involving medical professionals performing some of these parts of the procedures, and if so, what sort of evidence base do you think would be required for people to agree to get involved in an enterprise?
So typically what you need is an ethical view, an ethical committee permission for doing new things. You need patients, you need personnel who is willing to do it, and you need permission from the hospital. Now, for example, for an ethical committee to agree to something, you need to convince a round of different people from very different backgrounds that you're doing something that has a real chance to do something good. And that's why I have shown a little bit the questions, the task list of what would be done. On the basis of knowledge today, it will be difficult in Switzerland to convince anybody in the ethical committees that this really has a future and it's not just a good idea. So we need to have much more in hand, typically, even to move forward with the SIS device like the ones I've shown you. The other one is that in public hospitals, which usually are the University Hospital and have the best infrastructure, there is a clear political will, for example, not to do assisted suicide, because they say it's not the hospital task to do a suicide, and if you claim that cryonics is not a suicide, then there should be evidence kind of to show that. So I think there are significant hurdles in involving institutions. So it needs,
to make my question more specific, do you think anything less than, say, the revival of a large mammal, a successful revival based on cryonics procedures would be enough, or could just say, evidence of good preservation?
Most medical therapies come into the clinic by showing them in mammals. So if you can reanimate the cow head and see that the cow still is kind of cow-like, this is a good start. But it needs experimental evidence not only of the freezing activity, but also of the unfreezing activity. And there you have much less data, in my understanding, than for the freezing. Also the fact that to progress, some people need to participate in clinical trials. For example, the question of what to do with these frozen people, or these volunteers who kind of agree to participate in a scientific progress by being willing to undergo a limited risk to the benefit of knowledge. This is an open question.
But we do it for embryos. In a way, it's the proof that it works.
No, but the key question is the heat and the propagation of heat through tissues. And the embryos are so small that you drop them in liquid nitrogen and they freeze in a millisecond or so. So it's a completely different question than if you freeze a brain. And freezing rates are one of the key issues, even if you freeze cells. So if you want to freeze stem cells, hematologic stem cells, for example, it's very important to have the right freezing regime in degrees Celsius per time. And this will probably also be important for other tissues. So what I want to say is, for me, a cow head would be much more important than an embryo, because microscopic aspects seem to be very important in freezing and unfreezing project. It's not just a question what genes are inside the cells which are freezing. And the embryos, these are 8-cell embryos, so they are not kind of small humans with a head and leg and whatever. They are just blastocyte stage. Yes?
The question to hypothermia, do you induce hypothermia before restarting the heart or after restarting it?
Now in cardiac surgery, what is done is you you put the patient on a heart-lung machine, taking over heart function and lung function. The heart-lung machine has a very potent cooling device. That means you cool the patient down on the heart-lung machine, and when the body temperature goes below 30 degrees, patient spontaneously get into ventricular fibrillation or are put into ventricular fibrillation by an electrical pulse. And then you do the operation at whatever, 22 or 28 degrees, and then first you restart the heart-lung machine, and when the body has reached a temperature of 35, 33 or so degrees, then you re-synchronize the heart by another electric shock, and you look for recovery of heart function. Now, in CPR, in cardiac arrest, it's different. The patient has the arrest somewhere, he gets into the hospital. If it's winter, he's already somewhat cool when he comes in. Otherwise, he gets some cold infusions. And what we usually do, we put a central line which has a cooling element on the top, which is quite effective in controlled cooling and rewarming of these patients.
So in heart arrest in the field, you start hypothermia first.
No, what I want to say is, usually in Switzerland is a cold country. So average temperature is 10 or 12 degrees. And that means in most occasions, patients anyway cool down before they come to the hospital. And the studies which tried to add additional cold infusions, they failed to show benefit.
Okay.
So there was no value in kind of giving the people 2 liters of 4-degree cold water, and that's why it's not routinely done.
And in summer, at 30 degrees?
Well, we have many lakes. 20 degrees.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. The next speaker will be David Gifford.